Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I'm just having people trickle in right now. So we're just like a minute away from our official start time. So I'll do the go-to webinar icebreaker, which is, where are you all calling from? So I'm calling from Toronto. Feel free to type in the chat, and that way you're acquainted with the UI. So you'll have the chat on the right-hand side, and then there's another sidebar option for the Q&A. So you don't have to wait until the very end to type your Q&A questions. You can write it during the session as well. And at the end, we'll have all the questions accumulated. So we have Sweta. My apologies if I mispronounced your name, calling from Vancouver. So welcome. Pete, Sarah, where are you calling from?
Sarah, over to you.
Oh, I was going to type in the chat, but I'm calling from Oak. I'm being part of the crowd. I'm from Oakville. I'm calling from Oakville, Ontario.
Awesome.
I'm calling from Stouffville, Ontario. So just we're both kind of just outside Toronto, for those of you who are not from Toronto.
And we also have Maria, who's calling from Brooklyn. And what's awesome is that I just had to finish a session with her earlier this morning, and it was fantastic. So for all of you interested in DEI, I highly recommend reaching out to Maria as well. All right, so we are on time now. It is 1:15 Eastern time. So I will start off with introducing Sara and Pete. So Sara is the Senior Director of Learning and Development, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Pete is Senior Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Softchoice. And they're a two-person show running DEI for a 2,000-person company. So without further ado, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. So folks, great to be with you for the next 30, 40 minutes. Pete and I are really excited about sharing our journey at Softchoice with you. And hopefully today, for those of you who are well established in your own DE&I journey, this is maybe validation for the things that you're doing as compared to us. And for those of you who haven't started or are new to this really exciting body of work, we hope that we can share some ideas and lessons learned that you might be able to take with you on your journey. So we, by way of introduction, Hadan has shared, I'm Sara Lockhart and Pete Morra. We are going to collaborate over the next 30 minutes, get you interacting, ask you to engage in the Q&A. So please use the chat. Feel free as we go through to ask any questions. There's two of us. That means one of us can answer your questions while the other one is chatting. And we're certainly going to open it up for discussion at the end. But what we're here to do today is to take you on our journey. So titled, where we started and how it's going type of thing. And we want to walk you through three areas or three concepts. The first one being our approach to strategy planning and execution around DE&I. The second thing we're going to talk about is a little bit of learning and education, and we'll pepper in some lessons learned as well from our own journey. And then at the end of today, we want to talk a little bit about helping you start your journey, or kind of the framework for our journey that can translate to any organization, not just Softchoice. So you know who Pete and I are. I think it's important to understand who we are as an organization. So if you don't know Softchoice as a technology provider, that's what we do, full service technology solutions and services provider. And we service over 25 offices, 1,800, 2,000 people across Canada and the US. We enable organizations to meet their agile and innovative technology needs. So that means moving people to the cloud. That means building the workplace of the future and enabling really smart decisions around technology. We sell technology in layman's terms, and we're located in Liberty Village in Toronto and in Oakville, in Ontario. So let's dig into our DE&I strategy specifically. Like all organizations playing in the DE&I space, we've got goals, and we've got a 5-year, or this was built in 2020 as a 5-year goal for DE&I at Softchoice. And that is, as you see on the slide, by 2025 to build the most vibrant and high-performing organization in our sector by embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into everything we do. So without kind of, ripping this apart, I'm just going to dive in and help you understand how we took this strategic goal and actually added tactics, initiatives, and something tangible against it. So let's look at our priorities. We've got 4 key priorities that we're focused on at Softchoice. There are many. These 4 ground all of our efforts. So on the left-hand side, you see culture, talent, hiring, and advancement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. But what's important to understand is that we are here to create an environment where diversity and inclusion is understood and valued at every level in the organization. And we want to make sure that we're filling our organization with diverse people. We obviously can't achieve our goal if we're not doing that. And that means that we need to put diversity at the forefront of our recruitment practices, our hiring practices, and obviously through development to retain folks along the journey. We also support our DE&I, or diversity and inclusion, beyond what we'll talk about today. We're very active in the charitable space. We do a ton of charity work. And if we had more than 30 minutes, Pete could spend a day talking about that. That was the start of his role in this space, but a ton of charity work. We help our customers meet their DE&I goals, and we expand our impact through partnerships, through our suppliers, and the list goes on and on. So within those 4 priorities, we've got focus areas. And the one thing that I'll say to you as you're looking at this, and we can make these slides available to you, we're happy to share. So please reach out. You'll see at the end that we've shared our LinkedIn profiles. It is a small community, and we need to help each other learn in this space. So please ask. We've got focus areas that have all of our initiatives and tactics that help drive our priorities. So if you look at culture, for example, you'll see that we've established our goals. We've got goals for representation. We've got practices to meet those goals. We've got learning and education to increase awareness. And this applies across all of our priority areas. You'll see we've got, sourcing the talent, key partnerships to help bring folks into the organization, and obviously a bunch of sourcing strategies to attract more diverse talent to our organization. And with our hiring practices, we make sure that we put all of our leaders through inclusive hiring practices by way of training. We talk about bias and how it shows up in the interview process, and that's a critical component when you're bringing people into your teams and into our organization. And then finally, we talk about retention and advancement. We can't just bring people in the door. We need to keep them here. We need to develop them so that we can see diversity across every level of our organization. And last but not least, this is just a small portion of what Pete and I have been up to in 2021. I'll highlight a few things that I'm really proud of to share that we've been working on. We have a ton of initiatives, but some differentiators, in my opinion, are the ones that I'll highlight for you now. And the first one, in no particular order, is the Executive Inclusion Council. So this we launched this year, and this is a best practice in some other organizations, so you might be familiar with it. This is an intimate or small group of senior individuals in our organization, including our CEO and COO. And the goal of this Executive Inclusion Council is to take the work that Pete and I are doing, a team of 2 for 2,000 people, and really help us drive the strategic direction and the strategic decisions that's going to advance our efforts. This group meets quarterly to hone in on culture change, behavior change, and as I said, strategic direction. We've had one meeting and we're really excited about that continuation in 2022. We also this year have launched what we refer to as BU or VP Business Unit DE&I action plans. Pete and I have met with every single VP in our organization. There's about 20 of them. And we've looked at their organization and all of their areas of opportunity. So their gaps to goal, their current representation, the current climate of their culture. And we've worked individually with them to build a plan to advocate and make for change in their specific business units. And Pete's going to focus on some of that a little bit later when we talk about sales, because we are a very sales-centric organization. And so we've got lots of areas of opportunity to work on. And then the other piece that I'll talk to you about culture is what you'll see called maternity leave re-onboarding. So anybody in the audience who's taken a maternity leave, you know, you go away for 12 months, you do your very busy job as a mother, and you come back to the office and you thrust right back into the thick of things. And you've missed 12 months. And in today's day and age, that's a very long time to be away. A lot changes. So partnering with our leading women community, we have built a re-onboarding or a gradual return to work with a buddy to help you get back into the swing of things and really embrace that time away and help you get reoriented or re-onboarded. We continue to elevate with new recruiting partners year over year. So we have partnered this year with Out in Tech and with our children's medicine, two really critical partners for our success. We have something called Culture Connect, which we're really proud of. This is through our employee resource communities, we provide the opportunity for potential candidates to connect with any member of an ERG to find out more about what the culture or climate at Softchoice looks like. So if you're a woman coming into our organization, you might meet with someone from Leading Women to ask them a little bit about what it means to, what it feels like to be a woman at Softchoice, working at Softchoice. The same goes for our Orange Pride, our LGBTQ, our Shades of Orange, and the list goes on and on. And then the two other highlights that I'll share with you, and we'll keep things moving because 30 minutes is never enough. We've got two programs that we've queued up in the last year by way of mentorship and sponsorship for women. So we've got a mentorship program out of our Leading Women community, and we've just launched an SLT Senior Leadership Sponsorship Program for women. And all of these initiatives are obviously to help advance diversity in our organization. So lots to unpack there, and I've gone through it really quickly. You might be wondering, okay, that's a ton of stuff. Like, how did you get there? Where did you start? And so Pete's going to take us through that. I'm going to hand it over to you, Pete, and we're going to dive right in and get the audience engaged.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Goodness, I could listen to that all day long. Okay, so maybe we're going to try this poll feature within kind of the platform here. So let's see if this works. I'm going to talk to you a bit about where we are, or where we think we are on our DE&I journey. Let's find out where everybody else is. So publishing the poll. Everybody can start to answer. Super simple. So where is your organization when it comes to DE&I? Like, haven't started, just getting started, on your way and advancing, on your way and stalled, yikes, or strategic, you know, where DE&I is really a business strategic imperative at your organization. So awesome poll results coming in. I'm going to talk through where we're at, and then if there's anything super fascinating here in the results, we will touch on it. So I would say, so I started at Softchoice 5.5 years ago. What you're seeing here represents maybe, let's say, 3 to 4 years of that journey. And I would say our journey is, I'll say, relatively common. So like many organizations, you know, DE&I at Softchoice started with internal grassroots employees kind of bubbling up saying, hey, you know, we want an ERG for women. I'd say that's been the employee resource group we've had the longest, right? No executive support, no functional support, just a group of employees coming together. The majority of my focus when I joined Softchoice was on community investment. Let's go out and help everybody in the community, and let's address things like inequality and racial injustice in the community. And then as we got to phase 2, what we, you know, my title changed all the way through here, social impact. It was really, we took a much more proactive approach to connecting what we were doing outside the company with what we thought we should be doing inside the company. I mean, this is pretty straightforward kind of stuff. If we care about supporting women, visible minority communities, LGBTQ communities outside the company, why aren't we focusing on them and supporting our employees inside the company from these communities? So we had this kind of mind shift where we connected these ideas in the company. We had a few more ERGs that formed as a result. Our employee resource groups became the vehicle for, I'll say learning more about these issues. I'd say a bit more instead of that celebratory kind of approach, but connected ideas, more all-encompassing title, and more support from our executive team. We had some executive sponsors for our ERGs, for our social impact work. Where we sit now, or I think where Sara and I think we sit now anyway, is in this kind of strategic space. I mean, diversity inclusion, we have a 5-year strategy that's been adopted by the entire organization. We have every single VP building out a plan, Executive Inclusion Council. What really characterizes this more strategic, mature approach to DE&I is that you have full-blown, like across the board leadership support. This is no longer something I do off the side of my desk. It's my title as of only February this year. So kind of think about this as a 5-year journey. Like you need somebody paid in your organization to focus on this all the time if you're going to make any progress. And of course, now I'm partnered up with Sara, which is amazing. So, one thing, so you can kind of see like some of the characteristics of each phase up here. And it's interesting looking at the voting just to kind of see where everyone sits. It looks like we have a good group of people here sitting in that strategic space, which is fantastic. I'm sure we could learn just as much from you as, hopefully you can learn from us. What I found really interesting about this kind of strategic lens is that even the most well-designed, well-intentioned program that Sara and I can create for the organization is not going to be consistently implemented across the board, right? And one of the things we really started to focus on is that this idea that there's 3 sources of inclusion for any person in your organization, right? So the organizational level, absolutely, and the practices and programs that we launch. The department, or like, let's say your immediate work group level, that dynamic with how you work with your peers on a day-to-day basis has a tremendous impact on how welcomed and included you feel in the organization. And direct supervisors, I would posit for the group, direct managers are almost the most, I wouldn't say maybe the most important component here, but definitely one of the most important kind of stakeholders here, because when employees hear about DE&I practices from Sara, myself, from our CEO, that's going to be tested against their day-to-day experience. And the person you report to typically has the greatest influence on what that day-to-day experience looks like. So as we move to 2022 at Softchoice, we really look at not just what can we launch company-wide, but how do we embed it? How do we flow it out? How do we roll it out into the organization and cascade it so that at every level of your experience with the organization, you see it, you feel it on a day-to-day basis. So Sara, back over to you.
Perfect. So Pete said a couple things I'm going to jump right on, and that's, he talked about needing, or the person that you report to, our leaders really influence how this takes shape and the culture that we create. And I would say, that's a critical enabler. We're a team of 2. We need everybody to activate change in our organization. We simply can't do it with just the 2 of us. So Pete's talked about kind of that journey and where we think we are. We wanted to share in the next 15 minutes or so where we're going, so what we're focused on. And I'll bring you back to something I said at the front end, was around us building a culture where people feel valued and that sense of belonging. And more importantly, where the qualities that they bring to our culture are valued, highly valued rather. And so one of the things that we need to do, that we've learned, lesson learned, is that we need to start with education. Don't assume that everyone in your organization knows as much as you do. In fact, they don't. This is a new discipline in the industry and in the field of HR, if it sits within HR in your organization. And knowledge is scarce. So what Pete and I have learned through osmosis is that we need to start with education. So we're backtracking a bit. And we're focused in 2022 on raising awareness and increasing education across our entire organization. We've invested a ton of time with leaders. We will continue to do so. We're going to do that with our entire workforce so that everybody understands our priorities and what it takes to activate change. And so there are two concepts that Pete and I believe everybody needs to understand before they can be motivated to change and before they can actually start to advocate for change. And that's the term diversity. And I hate to read a textbook definition, but I think it's important for the purpose of this discussion that we understand that diversity is the range of human differences. So we know it as representation, but this includes and isn't limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability attributes, religious or ethical values, national origin, and or political beliefs. And inclusion is the second concept that is critical for us to enable success. And that's about the actions that we take to create that sense of belonging that we've talked about. It's about consciously processing all of our interactions, all of the judgments, all of the assumptions and decisions in our environment at Softchoice. And so you need to focus on both. It's not one or the other, it's both. You bring people in, but that doesn't create an inclusive environment. You might have diverse representation, but if they don't want to stay in your environment, if they don't feel a sense of belonging, then it's just a revolving door of trying to hit targets. And that's not what this is about. This is about creating an environment where I can look around and see people like me, where I can look around and see women in senior roles so that I have aspirations to grow in this organization. And the same goes for everyone in our Softchoice organization. So Pete and I thought it would be fun to go a little deeper and start to educate. What does that look and feel like in the industry and in our organization? So Pete, I'm going to hand it back to you. We're going to jump back into some polls and education.
Thank you, Sarah. So, I mean, chances are most of you, all of you maybe understand and know all of this stuff. But what's been really interesting is we've been focusing on DE&I so deeply over the last 2 to 3 years now. How many people don't really understand kind of these foundational principles. So we thought, listen, we'll kind of let you know what we're thinking. And if this helps you kind of reorient what you're doing, or if you're able to learn something from this, then fantastic. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, generally as practitioners, we typically focus on systems of like disadvantage or bias. We're going to touch on that in a second. But I think what's really become clear over the last year or so is that to really understand diversity and inclusion, it's also important to talk about systems of advantage, or of course what we call privilege. This might not be the first mention of the concept of privilege, but certainly one of the most well-known, Peggy McIntosh, years ago. And what's really important for all of us, especially in the workplace, to remember is that there are different identity groups to which people belong. Some of which have higher status in society and in the workplace, and some of which have and therefore are afforded certain privileges. And of course, there are people who also belong to identity groups that may have lower status and therefore might result in a lack of access to certain privileges. We talk about this a lot with respect to things like gender and race, but in the workplace, this can also be also different levels of status afforded to people who, based on age, based on tenure, based on department or function, accent, country of origin, all sorts of things kind of really fit into this idea of privilege. So to try and keep things interesting for everybody here, we're going to do a super simple, totally anonymous poll here. This is more of like a multiple choice kind of poll. So really quickly, review the statements and indicate whether you feel you can count on this privilege at work, let's just say most of the time or all of the time. Okay, so the poll's out there. And then, of course, as you're going through the poll, based on the types of answers you're giving, think about how these manifest in the workplace. And I would also say, especially for those of you who are in the most of the time, all of the time kind of category, the first question I would ask you is, are there any statements here that are surprising you? You know, when I first did this assessment myself a year ago, the second point kind of blew my mind for a second. Like the idea that I can't show up into the workplace and put a picture on the desk of my family, and that somehow that's going to result in a negative impact in the workplace, you know, really set off a light bulb, I guess, that um, this is a very real concern for many of our colleagues and coworkers in the workplace. So, you know, one of the things Sara and I try and do is guide our people managers in the organization on how do you send the right signals to people that may feel reticent to put a photograph of their family or their loved ones out. And what are the ways in which we can create an environment where people feel really comfortable and they don't feel like that's going to be um, have any sort of negative impact on them or their progression through the organization. So I'll leave the poll open just for a little bit, just so everybody can sort of marinate on what they see here. So privilege, right? The big takeaway here, some of us are going through this and it's an all the time. Never has it ever occurred to me that I couldn't do any of these things. For a lot of people, there are many times where they cannot count on these things. So our job as practitioners is to look at what can we do to create the environment where everybody feels like they belong, and like Sara said, and feels like they are being respected and valued for the qualities that make them distinct and unique. So we're talking about privilege at Softchoice. We're talking about bias at Softchoice, right? Unconscious bias, super common for us to focus on this in this space. Right, this refers to the attributes that we assign to people based on their social categories. So, right, we all carry conscious and unconscious bias for things and against things. These biases impact how we see people, how we impact people. And typically when we talk about unconscious bias, we're talking about attributes that we automatically assign to people based on social categories in a way that is, you know, understood to be unfair. One of the really, I mean, I'll say interesting things, but honestly, it's one of the most important things to understand about bias is that biases for many of us are so ingrained that sometimes you can't even see the bias until you're doing it and you're consciously thinking and aware of what you're doing. So what that means is that for a lot of people, the unconscious biases we may hold may actually be the opposite of our conscious values, right? And I would say we also, so if you've gone to like Harvard and done a project, the project implicit bias test, you may find that you have biases against your own group, you know, or some of your own identity groups. So really quick, I thought this was pretty interesting. So what's going on in the brain that drives this? It's always helpful, I think, to walk everybody back to why does this happen, and then what are we going to do about it? So, right, so as humans, we're exposed to, say, 11 million pieces of information at a time. Our brains can only consciously process a tiny little bit of that information. So we evolved to help us survive by automatically prioritizing what's important, what's not important, filtering things through questions like, who do I feel safe around, who's valuable to the team or to the group, who's right, who's competent. Automatic filtering means that we don't have to consciously make these decisions every time we interact with a new person. The problem is that our brains are really good at automatically filtering, interpreting incoming information. It happens so fast, it happens below our level of conscious awareness, that it's easy to believe that what you're seeing is objective. And for a lot of us, we may not even realize how much our decision making has been impacted by all of these little ongoing biases. So when we meet someone in the workplace, when we're considering someone for promotion, when I meet a new candidate, second I meet them, my brain's already categorized them, right? And once someone's put into a category, all the traits I associate with that category are applied to the person. And now I expect that person to not only represent all of those attributes, I also expect them potentially to behave in a certain way according to those attributes. So I'm going to give two examples of how we're talking about this at Softchoice now. The first one is probably pretty common to everybody. So the idea that, you know, we've got, one of the things we're trying to counter in the workplace is this notion that the DE&I is only something I turn on when I'm going to hire someone, right? It's only something I need to turn on when I'm going to promote someone. Okay, so how does it work, right? So unconscious bias, we know, can have a significant impact on how we draw conclusions about competence, leadership potential in the workplace. So here, just broad strokes, broad strokes. I'm just working from a couple gender stereotypes we may have in North America. Hopefully we're at the point where most people are looking at this and don't see any sort of gender in this, but for the purpose of the exercise, let's, we're going to use the North American sort of set of assumptions. We see this a lot in the tech industry, so feel sort of comfortable putting it up there in front of everybody. Okay, so these are stereotypes, unconscious biases that people may hold that are sort of based on gender, the idea that men are assertive and ambitious and all of that, and that women are caring and nurturing and warm and reliable. And role congruence, this idea you see up here, is when the attributes and the stereotypes we hold about certain people or categories of people, we also apply to certain roles. So role congruence looks something like this in the tech sector, right? The idea that, listen, men would carry with them a certain set of attributes and characteristics. And hey, listen, it also happens that in technology sales, we want people that are assertive, ambitious, decisive, and have leadership potential. Therefore, it can feel really natural to have men working in tech sales. Okay, we're going to unpack this a little bit more. Okay, so that's called role congruence. When you've got this really clean overlap. Okay, let's talk. And so like, this carries a bunch of problems right out of the gate. This is role incongruence. So with respect to men, technology sales, role congruence. And guess what? We see a lot of men working in technology sales. And the higher up you go in tech sales, the more homogenous the group gets. But looking at women in tech sales, we don't necessarily see that same inherent, natural, giant quotation marks here, relationship. So what happens is that to a hiring manager, it can seem like certain candidates are a natural fit for the role. It can mean that hiring managers may be, and probably are, certainly we've seen this enough, reluctant to hire people that don't fit that top bubble, right? So in the case of gender here, it may feel like for women, women are required to convince hiring managers that they actually can do this job, which means that very typically women are required to produce more evidence that they can be successful. It means that hiring managers are more willing to take risks on men in these roles versus women. And, generally speaking, this also applies to leveling within an organization. So if we as a group here look at these two bubbles and think, what, there's one here that I think people associate more with leadership potential, then you can kind of see how these inherent biases are going to result in, I'll say unfair advantages to some and unfair disadvantages to other. The body of research shows that the notion of success and competence is scrutinized a lot more carefully for members of lower status groups because the attributes we assign to categories like leader, innovator, people manager may be incongruent with the attributes we assign to women, visible minorities, that type of thing. So for us, this is one of the biggest mind shifts that we're going through right now. The idea that this is, number one, something you need to think about when you're making these big decisions. But number two, if we're thinking about promotion, the people we're going to promote today have been impacted by decisions we've made every day over the last 2 or 3 years. So not only do we talk about these big milestone moments, we talk about routine decisions that are made every single day and how bias fits into them, right? Assumptions about work style, preferences, who gets to provide input, who gets to speak in the meeting, who gets acknowledged, recognized. All these little things impact how far and how fast people progress through the organization. So, the body of research out there would say for sure, people in lower status groups are less likely to be seen as competent, less likely to be seen as having leadership potential. Very true for the tech industry, right? So it means people in those groups are less likely to be hired, less likely to be promoted. The bar for people in these groups is set higher in order to dispel any doubt about whether or not the person's a fit for a particular role. Like I said, women very typically are required to produce more evidence of success. It also means that equivalent behavior is evaluated differently based on who engages in it. So men who speak up more than their peers, typically rewarded with a 10% increase in ratings. Women who speak up more than their peers and offer great ideas are penalized, 14% lower ratings right out of the gate. Women are expected to engage in a lot of communal behavior, right? So helping workers, planning the office party, welcoming the new employee. They don't get extra points for doing these. These are not things that are considered when they're, when it comes to promotion, but they're viewed negatively if they say no. For men who engage in these behaviors, bumps all the way along, right? So we end up seeing a scenario that kind of looks like this, where over the course of 1, 2, 3 years, this is something we see in tech a lot. We have people, in this case, I'm using gender as an example. It does, this absolutely applies to a lot of the different identity groups we would see. We have people who benefit from advantages that have nothing to do with merit and capability or anything like that. And then we have other groups of people that don't benefit, and I would say whose progress is arrested because, again, of an unfair set of biases and stereotypes that exist in the tech space. Okay, and I would also say this graph here assumes that everyone's starting at the same point in time, right? And we're not all starting at the same point. So I'm gonna pass this back to Sarah just to leave this up. So that's the kind of stuff we're thinking about as we evolve our plan and we really try and drill this down into the level of education and practices and programs we need at Softchoice. Sarah, I'm going to flip it back to you just
Thanks,
to kind
Pete.
of wrap.
Yeah, it's perfect. And I mean, Pete just scratched the surface, right? There's so much. This is a half-day conversation with so much research and meat behind it, but hopefully that helps you understand where we're focused, and really where we're focused by nature of the type of organization that we are. Pete already articulated, as we start to see the pyramid, right? At the higher levels in our organization, we see less women, we see less visible minority representation. And so we're really working on changing that. But it's a big job. And so we're going to move to Q&A. Hadon, you have let us talk. So thank you for that. I was waiting for you to swoop in and tell us, give us one of these. But it's been a really healthy discussion, and we want to be able to answer any questions that you might have. I've put our DE&I kind of phased journey up for you, because you might find that this is a slide that you want to screen grab. It might be of value to you if you're thinking about where do you start and how do you get organized. As I said earlier, this can translate across any organization. This isn't Softchoice specific. This is our journey. And hopefully it's something that will lend itself to you as well. So Hadon, I promise that's it for the chatting. If we want to move to Q&A.
Yeah, not a problem. So thank you so much, Sara and Pete, for your informative session. So feel free, everyone, to write in the chat, or there's a column right beside it called Q&A. You can type your questions in there. But as people are formulating their questions, I actually have one for you too. So I wanted to ask Sara, I guess, what are some lessons you've learned?
Yeah, lots. I said earlier that education matters, and it matters early. So we're doing it a bit backwards. Those of you early in your journey, educate your workforce, educate your leaders now. Get everybody on the same page of awareness. It'll help you move things along. And the other thing I would say is, Pete shared with you that he's been at Softchoice for 5+ years. And only this year in February did Pete come on over to People in Growth. That's our HR function. Aligned with myself, I've also led this function in a previous life. So Pete and I became fast friends when I joined the organization with a common purpose. But you can't do this off the side of your desk. This needs to be a practitioner. It needs to be a discipline of work with the top cover behind it. And as you get more mature, you can't do this with just one person or two people. This is more work than Pete and I can manage. And so we're currently advocating to grow the team, and you'll need to do the same. Often we are small teams leading DE&I, and it's a huge body of work when you want to get through these phases to that strategic focus.
Totally. Thank you so much, Sara, for answering my question. So again, everybody, just a quick reminder, you type your questions in the chat or the Q&A function beside it. And I do have a question for you, Pete, as well, which is, like Sara said, you were there for like five years or more. And sorry, I think my connection was kind of spotty, but we're good now. Well, what were some of the big pivot points in the history of DEI at Softchoice?
I would say there's one. there's kind of the moment as an organization where you move away from the how would I phrase it? The let's celebrate every community to the let's talk about what's really going on with the community. So the example I would give would be 2 years ago, we celebrated Pride Month, like certainly pretty much every other corporation out there. It's great and it's wonderful, and the flags are out and changed the color of the logo, and everyone's happy, and we had some great like mixers and great. I mean, led by our employee resource group, but it was very much a positive spin on it. And then we got to National Coming Out Day in the fall, and for the first time ever, we didn't go to external experts or anything. We had people from the LGBT community who work for Softchoice talk about what it was like coming out. And that shifted the entire tone of everything in our organization around DE&I moving forward. Because when you start to dig into how these issues impact real people, your peers in the workplace, there are light bulbs certainly for people that never think about this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So hearing your colleague talk about being disowned by their family, and at 16, 17 years old and struggling, and you've worked beside this person for years and have never really realized it. Hearing employees from our Black ERG talking about last weekend being followed in the grocery store by like the security guard all the way through while they're shopping for their family barbecue. Like, these moments have had a huge impact on just for the consciousness of the organization and how we think about this. So it doesn't mean we don't celebrate and acknowledge each community, but we really focus on going deep and unpacking as much of this as we can. That's what really creates that motivation to change. Sarah talked earlier, like, you need to understand the issue. You need to understand these foundational concepts. You need to understand how it shows up in the workplace. You need to understand what you should be doing. You need the motivation to do it. And a lot of the motivation for some people comes from, again, hearing people you work with every day talking about this kind of stuff. So we try and balance these personal stories with meaningful corporate work so that we're not tokenizing anything. Yeah. And I just want to respond because I saw Lynn Charlton put a note in the chat talking about intersection experience in the poll questions. Bias is additive. So I didn't really touch on it, but the experience in North America, the experience of, like white man in the tech industry is definitely going to be different than, men from the Black community, white women, and then of course to be different from like women in the Black community. So we've started to talk more about intersection at Softchoice and unpack this stuff as well. It's a lot to balance, but we're getting there, I think.
No, thanks for sharing, Pete. And I think that's great that you acknowledge it as well, right? Like the intersectionality. I have time for one last question, so I'll put that on the stage. This is from Jeff. How would a smaller organization be able to achieve positive outcomes if they don't have the resources to commit to someone devoted to DE&I full-time?
Ooh, good question. Sarah, you can go first if you want.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I know we're short on time. So here's what I would say. I joined Softchoice 2 years ago. The first person I sought out was who leads DE&I. Well, nobody leads DE&I, but Pete Morra leads social impact, and he does diversity and inclusion. So off I went to find Pete because we shared a common passion. I started to get involved in it, even though it wasn't in my job title. So find people that have a common passion for this purpose, for this body of work. Start with an ERG community, and maybe that might be a blended, not 5 different ERGs, but one employee resource group. People actually make for change. It isn't a top-down approach. That advocacy is important, but it's everybody who's going to make culture and create culture. So find those people and get them working. We can do so much together. Pete, I know you got something to say in this.
No, that's okay. Well said. I would say the biggest impediment I found in starting was the idea of diversity and inclusion in an organization that hasn't really talked about it can feel massive, but also very intangible. So having a framework can help. This is where I started. So I'm going to drop this into the chat, a link, Center for Global Inclusion. Center for Global Inclusion has a sort of like a self-assessment kind of tool that's sort of organized very loosely and sort of, around the levels of maturity. This is where I started, and our scores were terrible. So, I just kept on advocating to add this to my scope of work, in the organization. I would say anybody on here, if you work in HR, you can always add it. I mean, no one ever really turns you away if you want to take on more work, as long as you're getting your job done. So if you're passionate about it and no one's doing it, like that's how I'm in the job now. Nobody was doing it. I just kind of made it part of the job and found a way to make it make sense to the organization that it was part of my job. And here we go. Yeah, I would agree. I would say support your ERGs. If you have employee resource groups, do whatever you can to support them and get them organized. That's where a lot of the energy for this really starts to come in.
Awesome.
Connect with us on LinkedIn. I mean, we'll share any of our tools with you as well.
Yes, I can attest. Pete and Sara are really friendly people. So if you do want to reach out, message them on LinkedIn. Like, I highly encourage you to do so. So with that, we're at time. So thank you so much, Pete and Sara, and everyone else in the session today for participating. I want to give a quick shout out that right now we have our networking and virtual trade show time right now. So please check out the sponsor booths. They're incredible. Emerging HR Tech is there as well. And there's also a networking function in AirMeet. So that's a great opportunity for you to meet other people who are just as passionate and interested in continually learning about DE&I. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.